Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your hosts, Bryant, with my permanent guest, Cammy. Hey there, Cammy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing okay. We're trucking along. This will be February, I think. It's been a pretty packed year so far for episodes. I've been really enjoying this. How are you doing?
Super fantastic. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. So if you're here for the first time, Mythstorie likes to grab myths, stories, legends, anything you can think of, any topic that you can fathom. Then we'll talk about it and give you a story in our own words, in our own ways. And we're revisiting a really good topic that is probably going to produce. If my calculations are correct, another 998 more episodes because we're going back to the 1001 Nights, otherwise known as the Arabian Nights. Now, we've done 2 episodes, the Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, which was so good. And it was wild. I re-listened to it because it was when you and I still were recording on the Yeti, just, hovering around a desk, talking to each other in person. So that was wild. And Sinbad as well. We covered that. So they're both 2-parters because they end up sort of being a little longer. That's the nice thing. I mean, these stories are pretty old, and there's tons of great free sources out there on them. So it's really fun. So we're planning on this one being a 2-parter as well, and we're going to be talking about Aladdin, which is a part of the 1001 Nights. Story. That's where it kind of originates. It's a little finicky actually when you get down to the history side, but we're gonna get started. So Cammy will give us a story just like she did on the other episodes, and then I'm gonna talk. So it's a little different. I'm gonna recap a little bit on what the 1001 Nights is, the history of that. I'll try and keep it not as the same from the last 2. But if you really love this stuff, Sinbad was great as well. But Alibaba's story was super awesome. So if you want more immediately, please go check those out. But we'll have this Aladdin episode we'll hit first, and then part 2 will finish the story and a little bit more of the history next week. But Cammy, please regale us with a tale of Aladdin.
Sure. So I'm using the same book that I used for the other 2, the Arabian
Very
Nights.
nice. She's showing it to the camera if you're
Yes.
driving in your car.
Our hero was from a very humble home in the capital of a very wealthy province of China. His father could not afford an apprenticeship for his boy, so he set out to teach him his own trade. But Aladdin had no use for work. He upset his father so much that the man fell ill and died. His mother sold off her husband's shop and lived off of her sewing. Aladdin would rather spend his life roaming the streets with his friends than help his mother, so he did this for years until he was barely still a boy. That is, until one day a magician saw him on the street and tricked him with charming words and coin into thinking he was the boy's long lost uncle. He made a show of telling the boy's mother about plans he had for the child to become a merchant of the finest goods, and even brought Aladdin clothing fitting this position. The next day, the magician told Aladdin he would take him to the gardens that surrounded the city, and they set out to see the wonders. They arrived at the gardens, but only stopped to eat a quick bite before heading further out into the mountains. When they arrived at the place where the magician wanted to stop, he started a fire and blew perfume over it. This caused the very ground below them to shake and expose a large stone on the ground. Aladdin was urged to lift it by himself. He protested, but tried anyway. The stone lifted with very little effort, exposing a hole in the ground that would just fit a man through it. The magician instructed the boy to go directly into the cave and not touch anything except for a single lamp that rested in that place. Otherwise, death would be the consequence. He did say that as he left, he could pick any jewels off the trees that lined the passage out. He gave our hero a ring to aid him on his journey. Aladdin obeyed him. He found the lamp and dared not touch anything except for the jewels he loaded his pockets with on the way out, and came back to the entrance with the lamp. But he was unable to exit the cave without help from someone. The magician told him to throw him the lamp and that he would then help him. But Aladdin refused because he did not trust that direction. The magician was so infuriated that he threw more perfume on the fire and said the words to close the stone over the cave entrance. The boy spent 2 days in the dark cave until he began to become uncomfortable. The ring the magician had given him as a form of protection was his only hope. So when Aladdin went to put his hands together in prayer, he rubbed the ring and the genie appeared. Aladdin thought he was surely seeing things, but when the genie asked what he could do for him, the boy asked if he could take him away from this place. As soon as the words left his lips, the genie disappeared, and Aladdin was back at the gates of his city. He ran home and pleaded with his mother to give him food. She was so happy to see him alive that she agreed. The next morning, the boy was hungry again, but they were out of food. Aladdin decided to go sell the lamp, but his mother went to polish it so it would fetch a better sum, and a genie appeared and asked what her wish was. Aladdin spoke and said they wanted food. The genie produced a huge table of the biggest feast either had ever seen, all displayed upon dishes of pure silver. The two ate for days on what was given them, and lived for years on the coin the plates fetched. Aladdin had no use of the lamp for that entire time, until a princess came to their city. At the sight of this woman, Aladdin was amazed by her beauty. He had never seen another woman that could compare. He was certainly not of the caliber of man who could sway a sultan into giving his daughter's hand in marriage, but that didn't stop him from trying. He pleaded with his mother to bring the gift of jewels he had managed to take from the cave and arranged it perfectly on a fine platter the genie had given them when he had asked for food so many years ago. His mother agreed, but was hesitant. She visited the sultan, and 2 weeks went by without her seeing him, until one day he took notice of her. She came to him and asked for his daughter to be married to her son and presented the jewels to the sultan. He agreed to the marriage, for this was the most valuable gift any suitor had yet to bring. His advisor whispered to him that he had already offered his daughter's hand to another boy, but the sultan only agreed to give the boy a chance to produce a finer gift within 3 months' time. Aladdin's mother returned to his son and gave him the good news. He was excited, and a week passed before the devastating news reached them. The princess would be married that evening to someone else. Aladdin was heartbroken, but he knew that the lamp would save him.
Very cool.
What's going to happen next?
Yeah. So I mentioned, especially with Alibaba, I didn't really look into the story, and so I kind of knew blips of Aladdin, and of course I know of the Disney movie, which I haven't seen in a while though, so my memory's a little hazy. But it's interesting to see what stayed. It's interesting to see what stayed in that film and what didn't. But it's really cool to hear the story and especially hear how it really resonates with the telling of the other stories. Now, I'll again, I mentioned I'm gonna give you a little reminder on the 1001 Nights history, and then I'll talk about Aladdin specifically in the next episode. I'll talk about some of the bigger themes of it. It's really cool. We've also, so one thing, I guess I'll start with this. You know, the 1001 Nights. That's what it's kind of formally known as from its Arabic name, 1001 Nights. But then it was sort of called Arabian Nights when it was translated. And there's a handful of sources that come at primary sources, but it's really interesting because this is really a huge collection, obviously, but of tales from all over ancient worlds going into medieval periods. So it's set in the medieval period. That's 100% for sure. And that's the time when it was really, someone said, let's write this stuff down. But much like a lot of older stories and epics and things like that, these are stories that have been around orally or just known culturally for a very long time. And they were just kind of compiled over time, because Aladdin is really interesting because it's supposed to take in China, but it's not implicitly said. I'll go into that a little bit more later. But mainly, I mean, you've got stories from Persia, modern day Iran. India is a huge source of a lot of the stories, even Greece. If you don't know kind of ancient and classical history so much, when Muslims continually took over Africa, they took over Alexandria and really famous Greek areas. And they absorbed a lot of that culture too. And that's really evident in stories, especially like Aladdin, the ancient history that's imbued in those stories. And it was sort of roughly here from some of my old notes. We do have ideas that around the 9th and 10th century, there's evidence of a discussion from these popular rulers began collecting these 1,000 tales. This one guy in specific, Abd Allah ibn, did I say that right? I probably didn't. Abdus al-Jashiari began a collection of 1,000 popular Arabic, Iranian, Greek, and other tales, but he died when only 480 were written. There we go. That was a mouthful. So one interesting thing. So even though these tales were sort of collected and known, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that these weren't really treasured in Asian and West Asian and Arabic culture. Like fiction had a low cultural status, especially during the medieval period. Now, this was a time where we were getting great advances in science and mathematics and things like that throughout Asia. And these stories were dismissed as what Wikipedia uses the word khurafa, which they denote is improbable fantasies fit only for entertaining women and children. So I kind of get that. But some of these stories are pretty big.
Yeah, only women and children like fiction.
I know. Yeah. Psh, posh. And but it's noted. I mean, a lot of these are definitely inspired by old epics like the Odyssey and things like that. And so where it really kind of came from was this French dude, Antoine Galland, in the 1700s, a French dude. He acquired these stories and he kind of created the first translation of the 1001 Nights. And he specifically got Aladdin from a Syrian storyteller, because Aladdin is known as one of the orphan tales, is what they're called, along with the famous Sinbad. It was not in the original collection. It got added when the West got involved. So if you kind of had, like, again, these stories weren't exactly famous in Arabic speaking countries. They were known sort of all around. Some of them were known. I mean, it's really kind of hard to say where they would have been localized, but that's one thing that once the stories kind of got out, they did get kind of smushed together and packed and then moved out. And that's the interesting thing about the Aladdin part, is it seems like that was sort of added by Antoine Galland when he did this. And it's not impossible, especially if we think of like Mongolia territory, like sort of the middle places in between China and Russia. You do have some of these terrains, but they even they mention the word sultan. They don't mention anything that really firmly ties this in as to China. But we have paintings from the 1800s that depict the story. There's tons of depictions of the 1001 done by Western artists, and for Aladdin, it's a very it actually, there's the Sultan's daughter is wearing a dress that looks just like the one Mulan wore at the beginning of Mulan. I was just seeing this on Britannica's article. They had this old painting, and it was this blue that she had in the animated film. So maybe that was an homage to that. But either way, Aladdin is still one of the most popular. It's totally gone and blown up since then, and is it's probably the most famous, despite not even being one of sort of the original 1001 stories. One last thing about sort of the history is when it was the framing. It's like a story within a story. The stories are also called Scheherazade, which it denotes that the stories are sort of, the reason why there's 1001 of them is because there's this evil sultan dude who, fictionally, who is, he finds out his wife cheated on him. So he's like, every day I'll marry someone and I'll kill them before the day ends, so that way I don't have to be cheated on. And he gets to this one woman, and that's her name. And that Scheherazade comes from a Middle Persian name called Cherazade, which was then kind of pronounced Scheherazade, which was also the German sort of. So we're kind of rolling through several languages here. But The Scheherazade bit is it's kind of cool. We talked about more on Alibaba. Scheherazade is basically stalling. So she's like, no, don't kill me. She marries the Sultan. No, don't kill me. I'm going to tell you a story. And she just basically keeps it going. And yay, the Sultan ends up falling in love with her and stops killing people. That's that kind of in a nutshell. It's a cool framework for the stories. And again, like a story within a story. So she's telling the Sultan like about Aladdin, about Sinbad, about Alibaba, and so on. So I really like that. That's the framework, but that also kind of came a little bit later. But back on Aladdin, again, yeah, one of the most popular. It's definitely inspired by several things, but it's really the Arabic folklore is really planted in it. So we have the genie, which we get that from jinn, which the best way to translate it is demon. Although in the West, we use the word demon, and it's almost always very evil. Jinn can kind of be spooky. They can be bad. Like they don't have to be like super evil murderous, but they have a long history in there, and they can be bound to things. And that really started in medieval Arabic countries, where you bind a genie to something like a lamp, which was a very common thing to have at this time. Also, Aladdin's ring that he has that protects him, having a genie. That's what gives it the magical properties. It's actually really cool. The jinn I found they're referenced in the Quran. So they have a very deep meaning in it, and it reminds me of like talking about like banshees in Irish culture. Like you've got the banshee in your house. In Ireland, it's the house banshee. It's like, oh, that creaking, that's the banshee. What are you gonna do? That screaming that we hear in the distance, what are you gonna do? One big inspiration though for that maybe there's a story called the Magic Lamp. This is a South Asian variant from the Santal people of India and Bangladesh. So there's an idea that, again, and this really helps give us the picture of 1001 Nights and its multiculturalism. This story could have sort of flown through from India during Islamic conquests into India, and it could have been lifted through there. So I don't know. We don't really have much evidence of how old the specific story of Aladdin is, but it's clear that because we have references of enchanted lamps and rings dating back to literally biblical 10th century texts through King Solomon, and who, the son of David, king of Israel. So there's a really rich history there. And Aladdin, probably older than what it is, probably wasn't called Aladdin the entire time, and likely came from what we call India now. But it's a really cool mix, and it looks like it really kind of got this form in the medieval period, and then was lifted into the 1700s when French dude imported it and then started making bank on selling this stuff. So yeah, that's where I'll leave it for now. We've got more to talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit about more on the magic lamp, more on we're also going to mention the magic carpet, which I'm going to mention that, which isn't actually part of the original story, but is a big deal in the other one. But that is really closely tied in what we've got here as well. I'm going to put it in the links for this show. The Project Gutenberg has a 1914 edition of Arabian Nights that I found. I didn't catch this before. It was done by not Dr. Jonathan Scott. Yeah, so it's based off of Antoine Galland's 1704 book, which he discovered a 16th century transcript in Egypt. So it's kind of wild. A transcript that was from 100 years before Antoine Galland, he gets it, he translated it, and then 100 years later, it's floating through all of Europe, and then by 1914, it's being printed in America and widely available. And it is extremely, extremely important. I'll mention H.P. Lovecraft. I remember we looked at him a little bit. I've looked at him a little bit. He got a copy of that, and that's one of the books he credits as really helping him skyrocket his writings and stuff like that. So really, really influential piece of writing, and the stories are pretty interesting. So I'll put the Gutenberg link in the description if you want to check them out. The whole stories are there, Aladdin and everything. Don't read ahead though until next week. So Cammy, does that cover it for now?
For Aladdin, sure. I do want to mention that we are teaming up with Popular Opinion YouTube, and Bryant,
Yes.
I guess you can put a link at the bottom,
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
some of our episodes, but we are doing basically the same thing we're doing here, but we take the Myth Funko Pops and we do the episode based on these pops. So the first one was Bigfoot.
Mhm.
That one's already up, and then we should have a couple up, in a couple weeks when you're actually
Yeah, yeah,
watching
a
this.
fun little
So
extra thing we're doing what we do here with, Cody. He does a great job on his show, which is pop themed, and it's just a fun way for us to do what we've been doing and kind of get the word out a little bit more. So please check him out. I will put a link in the description, and feel free. Facebook's a great way to get in touch with us. We are on Twitter as well, Instagram, all that fun stuff. So if you have any questions or comments, you can reach to us out there, or Mythstorie. It's all one word with an IE at the end at gmail.com is another great way too. So thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
thank you, Bryant.
Oh.
Oh.